I've been camping alone for years. Not for sport, not for the thrill, but because it was the only time I ever felt like I could breathe. I wasn't one of those gearhead types with titanium stoves and synthetic sleeping bags you could fit in your pocket. I used old stuff, hand-me-downs, and some things I found in thrift stores. My boots were nearly bald on the soles. My tent had duct tape on 3 seams, and the lantern I used had Coleman etched into the top so deep from years of oil and soot that it looked like it had been welded there. That weekend I'd picked a spot I hadn't been to before, about 15 miles north of where I usually went, deeper into a range of hills nobody talked about unless they were loggers or doing backcountry survey work. No major trails, no road signs. You had to follow old forestry routes, some overgrown and forgotten. I liked that. I parked my truck at the base of a ridge where a creek had once cut through years ago. Now it was dry. I followed it up into the hills, winding my way over roots and dead leaves and the soft collapse of decades of pine needles. The only sounds were the wind moving high through the trees and the slow crunch of my steps. I didn't see a soul. Perfect. I hiked about 4 hours before settling on a spot. It was quiet, flat enough to pitch a tent, and not too exposed. There was a small slope behind me that kept the wind off, and a half circle of trees made it feel boxed in, almost like it had been made for that exact use. I didn't question it. I was tired, hungry, and it felt right. I set up camp, got the tent staked, gathered some rocks for a fire ring, and set my pack down. The first night was normal. I ate jerky and canned beans. I boiled water. I sat with my back against a log and watched the sky turn black. I watched the fire die slowly, the flames getting swallowed by orange glow and then just coal. The quiet out there was total. Not empty, just total. You hear things if you're used to the city, your ears start looking for patterns that aren't there. I knew how to tune that out. It was the kind of silence I had grown to need. I went to bed, zipped into my bag, headlamp around my neck still glowing a dim yellow. I slept hard. The next morning, I woke up at first light. My bladder dragged me out of the tent. It was cold, colder than it should have been for late spring, and my breath fogged the air. I was halfway through the motion, standing behind a tree, when I saw something odd on the ground a few feet away, a little patch of disturbed dirt. At first I thought it was a squirrel digging for something, or maybe I'd stepped on a burrow without noticing and caved it in. But the hole wasn't deep. It looked like something had poked up from beneath, not down into it. I bent down and squatted next to it. Just loose soil. I brushed it lightly with my fingers. No hole, not really. Just like the earth had been pushed up an inch and cracked. I didn't think much of it. Maybe a mole. Are moles even blind? Couldn't remember. I remember hearing once that they barely see at all. I wondered what it was thinking, pushing up into the world like that, blindly tunneling around underfoot, totally unaware of what might be standing over it. I shook it off, stretched, and went about my day. I hiked around the ridge for most of the afternoon. Didn't find much. Some old stumps, a rusted-out bucket maybe left by a hunter, and the bones of what looked like a deer. Clean bones, old, picked dry by time. No footprints, no game trails, no people. That night, I lit another fire. I didn't eat much, just a few crackers and a protein bar. I'd lost my appetite a bit. That patch of dirt stuck in my head more than I'd expected. Not because of what it was, but because of how out of place it felt. The rest of the ground had a crust to it, packed leaves. This looked like something wanted to get out. By midnight, the fire was dying again. I added a few sticks, just enough to keep the coals warm, and then crawled back into the tent. I didn't fall asleep right away. I laid there listening, still nothing but wind. At some point, must have been an hour later, I heard a rustle. Not leaves, not branches, dirt. That's a sound I know. When something moves through leaves, it slides. When something moves through dirt, it shifts. The pressure changes. The weight sounds different. It was soft, like something brushing against the bottom of the tent or just next to it. I didn't move. I turned off my headlamp and listened. It stopped. A full minute passed. Then it started again on the other side of the tent now. Slower, more like a press. Not scratching, not like an animal. Just wait. I sat up and unzipped the flap slowly. I stuck my head out. Nothing. Just trees and darkness and the faintest curl of smoke from the last of the fire. I didn't sleep after that. I sat with my boots on, headlamp ready, knife in hand, until daylight cracked over the hills like a door creaking open. I was stiff, cold, hungry, and now fully on edge. I walked the campsite again. Another patch of raised soil. Same size, same shape, same distance from the tent, but on the other side. That was when it clicked that they were symmetrical, like something was mapping the edges of where I slept. I can't explain the chill that gave me. I've seen bear prints, cougar tracks, human tracks. I know how to measure threat out here. This wasn't threat in a normal way. I decided I'd break camp and move a few miles, just enough to clear my head. But something kept me from packing. Instead, I ended up walking in circles. I hiked maybe 2 miles, looped back, and by the time I got to camp I was tired again and didn't feel like tearing it all down. By nightfall, I convinced myself it was paranoia. The third night, I barely lit a fire, just enough to boil some water. I didn't eat again. At about 2 a.m., I woke up to movement again. This time it was more definite, more pressure. It didn't circle, paused. Then there was a dull thud sound against the side of the tent. Not enough to shake it, just enough to register, like someone dropped their fist into the ground next to me. I didn't move. I didn't breathe for a second. Then silence. 20 minutes passed. Another thud, this time under me, directly under me. I froze. Something, whatever it was beneath the tent, not beside it, under it. I waited another hour. Dawn didn't come fast enough. When I finally crawled out, the light was gray and tired. I pushed the tent aside and looked at the ground. Right under where I'd been lying was a patch of loose soil, smaller this time, only about the size of a closed fist. But it had the same look, the same cracked, raised edge. That was it. I started packing. I didn't eat. I didn't drink. I packed up fast, barely rolling the tent, just stuffing it in the sack, shoving it all into my pack. When I stood up and turned to grab my water bottle, I saw a third patch of dirt, right where the fire ring had been, like something had come up and pressed against the coals from underneath, like it had been watching. I didn't stop. I didn't think. I shouldered the pack, grabbed my knife, and started down the dry creek bed as fast as my legs would take me. I didn't care about trails. I just went downhill. Roots smacked my shins. Branches tore at my jacket. I fell twice. I didn't stop to check for scrapes or blood. I just wanted out. For hours later, I saw the edge of my truck through the trees. It looked unreal, like something from a life I'd had years ago. I threw my pack in the bed and didn't even change out of my boots. I just started the engine and drove. The road back was rougher than I remembered. I bounced and slid and cursed the gravel. I didn't feel better until I hit pavement again. I drove straight through, didn't even stop to piss. That was months ago. I haven't gone camping since. I haven't even slept with the windows open. I don't know what was under the ground that night. Maybe it was a mole. Maybe it was a badger or some burrowing animal acting weird. But I can't stop thinking about it. How precise it was. The placement. The stillness. I think about how it didn't run or scatter or make a sound like animals usually do. Pressed. It waited. It mapped. Sometimes, late at night, I think back to that last morning. That last patch of soil inside the fire ring. I remember thinking, are moles really blind? And then I wonder, what the hell was it thinking? Because whatever it wasn't acting blind. And it sure as hell knew I was there. I'm not sure why I remember the small things the most, like the way the cooler handle creaked when I pulled it from the truck bed, or how the gravel under my boots felt weirdly soft compared to other campsites I'd been to before. That weekend had been about clearing my head more than anything else. I had work stress piled so high I couldn't sleep, and my doctor kept telling me to take a break. So I picked a campsite I found online, one of those not-so-popular, semi-maintained public lands with first-come, first-served spots and no real rangers nearby. You had to pack in everything you needed and pack it all out, including your trash. That's the kind of isolation I wanted. I got there late on a Friday afternoon. It was deeper in the woods than I expected. with a narrow dirt road that turned into nothing but tire grooves after a while. I remember checking my GPS and realizing I had no signal anymore. It wasn't a surprise, I was ready for that. I had everything printed out. Maps, weather forecasts, even an emergency contact list laminated and shoved in my backpack. I wasn't new to camping, and I liked doing things solo. By the time I got the tent set up and got the fire started, the sun was already low behind the tree line. The place was quiet in the kind of way that feels unnatural if you're not used to it. No traffic, no human voices, just wind slipping through pine needles and the occasional distant bird call. I remember thinking that I was finally going to get some real rest out there. I cooked some basic stuff, beans and sausage over the fire. Nothing fancy. I had a book with me, one of those thick historical nonfiction ones, and I planned to read a few pages before turning in. I'd brought a little camp light and had set up the tent pretty close to the fire ring, just enough to stay warm from the radiating heat. I didn't even see it at first. The cat, I was sitting on my folding chair, reading in the flickering firelight, when I heard something lightly crunching on the pine needles and dry leaves off to my right. It wasn't heavy, definitely not a person, and not loud enough for something big like a deer. I glanced over and there it was. A cat, dark gray or maybe black, hard to tell in the low light. It wasn't doing anything weird. It just walked up to the edge of the firelight, stopped, sat, and looked at me. Its eyes glinted orange from the flames. I'm not much of a cat person. I don't dislike them, I've just never owned one. But I've been around enough to know what they usually act like. This one didn't seem scared or aggressive. It was calm, watching, cleaned one paw and then stretched out like it was preparing to nap. I figured it had to belong to someone, maybe a cabin nearby or a local farm. It didn't have a collar that I could see, but that didn't mean much. Some people let their pets wander. I found it strange though, this place was far from anything. I hadn't passed a house in over an hour, but maybe it followed someone else here earlier in the week. I tossed a little bit of sausage its way, and it sniffed it, nibbled a few bites, then just sat back down. I remember thinking, I love that it just acted like a normal cat, like it didn't care at all about being in the middle of nowhere with a stranger, like it had done this 1,000 times. I turned in not long after that. The cat didn't follow me into the tent, which I was glad for, since I didn't want to deal with fur or claws tearing through my gear. Curled up just outside the tent, I think. I could hear soft scratching on the ground nearby for a bit, then silence. I slept well, not deeply, but better than I had in weeks. The next morning, it was gone. I didn't think much of it. Animals come and go in the woods. I cooked breakfast, made some coffee with my small press, and hiked down the trail that led to a small lake I'd seen on the map. It was maybe 2 miles each way. I didn't see another person the whole time. When I got back to camp, everything was the same except that the firewood I'd stacked beside the fire ring was scattered. Not dramatically, just like someone had walked through it and kicked the pieces around. I thought maybe a raccoon had come through looking for scraps. There were some old paw prints in the soft dirt, but I couldn't tell what they were from. Could have been anything. No big deal. That night, the cat came back. Same deal as before. Just strolled into the firelight like it lived there, sat down, and stared at me. I felt a strange comfort in it. I liked the company. It didn't meow or make any noise. Just sat there, tail flicking every once in a while. I fed it again, just a little piece of beef jerky this time. It ate and then walked over to the tent and laid down next to it, like it had claimed that spot. I left it alone and climbed into my sleeping bag. But that night wasn't like the first one. I woke up around 2 or 3 a.m. Not sure why. I didn't have a watch on, and my phone was off to save battery. But something had pulled me out of sleep. The air inside the tent was still. I lay there for a while, trying to figure out what felt off. I didn't hear anything at first. Then I noticed that the normal forest sounds were gone. No insects, no wind, nothing. Just stillness. And then I heard it. A noise outside the tent. Heavy. Not the soft paw steps from the night before. This was weighty crunching, like someone dragging their boots in a wide, lazy arc just outside the tent. I didn't move. I just lay there, barely breathing. The steps were slow. not in a stalking way, but like someone pacing or inspecting something. Then they stopped right outside the tent flap. I gripped the inside of my sleeping bag, my breath held. I thought stupidly that I'd zipped it too high and wouldn't be able to get out quickly if I needed to. The tent wall shifted slightly, like something brushed against it. Then nothing. Eventually, the sounds faded. I don't remember falling back asleep, but I must have. When I woke up, the sun was just rising. I got out of the tent and scanned the clearing. No sign of anyone. But the weirdest part was the prints. There were prints everywhere circling the tent. Not shoes, bare feet. Human feet. Dozens of them. Different sizes. Some small, some wide, some narrow. Just imprints in the soft dirt and pine needles. Walking in loops around where I'd been sleeping. But no other signs of people. No trash, no tools, no clothing. Just footprints. The cat was gone again. I packed up that morning, planning to leave a day early. The prints freaked me out, and I had no way to report them with no signal. I didn't want to hike out in the dark if something happened, so I figured I'd take the long way out during daylight. I loaded up most of my gear and made one last loop around the site, checking to make sure I hadn't left anything. That's when I saw it. Just beyond the tree line, maybe 20 feet from my tent, something was lying in the brush. At first, I thought it was a log, but when I walked closer, I saw fur. It was the cat, curled up like it had gone to sleep, but it wasn't breathing. His body was stiff. The strange thing was it didn't look injured. No blood, no wounds, just dead. I bent down and looked closer. There was something in the fur, tucked into its side. I reached out and found what looked like a small length of string or twine, tangled in its fur. But when I pulled gently, it wasn't string. It was a cord, smooth, plastic-coated like electrical wire. It was attached to a small metallic disc just under the fur, right on the cat's side. I didn't know what I was looking at. A tracker? Some kind of implant? It didn't look like anything a vet would use. I felt a chill in my neck and backed away. I didn't bury the cat. I should have, maybe, but I just grabbed my pack and left. I didn't look back at the campsite. I hiked fast and didn't stop until I was at the truck. The whole way, I had the sense I was being watched. That kind of pressure on the back of your neck, like something just out of your peripheral vision. But I never saw anything. Back at the truck, I loaded up, turned the engine, and drove. I didn't relax until I was on the highway. A few days later, I looked up animal tracking devices. Some of them looked similar to what I saw, but nothing matched exactly. I never found any news stories about lost research animals or escaped pets. Nothing. But that's not the part that sticks with me the most. Is that for the 2 nights I was there, I fed something that just acted like a normal cat. Sat there like it had no care in the world. Ate like it was hungry, like any pet would. Slept next to my tent like it trusted me. But something about the wire under its fur, the clean and sudden way it died without signs of trauma, and the footprints circling my tent. It all makes me think it wasn't a cat. It just acted like one. And whatever it was, whatever had been moving around my camp while I slept, whatever had circled me in the dark, hadn't been deterred by my fire or my presence. The cat might have been watching me, or maybe something had been watching it. Either way, I'll never camp alone again. I had planned that camping trip for almost 6 months. Work had been piling up, and I needed to be away from screens, cell towers, meetings, and people. I picked a spot I'd only read about in older hiking forums. An unmarked clearing deep in a national forest that stretched for miles with barely any cell signal, much less roads. I didn't want company, and that seemed like the best place to make sure I didn't have any. The closest town was almost an hour's drive from where I planned to hike in, and from there it was another few hours of navigating dense forest on foot. I packed light but smart. Enough freeze-dried meals for a week, water purification tablets, good boots, a proper tent, emergency gear, a basic first aid kit, a flashlight with extra batteries, and a hand-drawn map I made from piecing together different trail reports. I carried a hunting knife and a bear spray canister just in case. I'd been camping and hiking alone for years, so I knew how to read tracks and signs, and I was comfortable in the wild. I wasn't scared. The first day was just tiring. I hiked in early, pushing through underbrush that hadn't been disturbed in what felt like a long time. I reached the clearing by late afternoon and set up camp near a small stream that ran cold and clean. The silence there was unlike anything near civilization. Just the occasional rustle of trees or chirp of birds. I made a small fire, had dinner, and crawled into the tent before dark settled fully. That first night was uneventful. Cold, quiet, peaceful. I slept through until morning without waking once. Day 2 was much of the same. I wandered around the area, collected dry wood, took photos of plants I didn't recognize, and sat for hours listening to the forest. It was the kind of silence that buzzes in your ears after a while. I didn't see any other signs of human activity. No rappers, no old fire pits, nothing. Just thick woods. But late that afternoon, I saw something odd. I was following a faint game trail not far from the stream when I noticed a patch of disturbed leaves and branches. Something had thrashed through recently. There were drag marks, like something heavy had been pulled off the trail and into a thicket. I figured maybe a predator had made a kill, or an animal had fought something off. I looked around for prints and found a few faint ones. Canine-shaped, big, but worn down from the forest floor's softness. They weren't fresh, but they were there. I didn't feel unsafe, but I marked the spot mentally and headed back to camp. That night was different. I woke up just after midnight. At first I wasn't sure why. I wasn't cold, and there was no noise. Then I heard it, a rustling outside. Not wind, a heavy, slow crunching of dry leaves. Something moving. I sat up in the tent and listened. Circled once, slow and steady, and then stopped. I could hear breathing, not loud but close. Something big. I stayed still, holding my breath, and reached for the knife I kept next to my sleeping bag. Minutes passed. Then it moved off. The steps grew quieter until I couldn't hear them anymore. I waited a long time before falling back asleep. Morning came. I stepped outside and looked around. There were tracks, deep, clearer than before. Dog-like, more than one set. They had circled my tent, padded around the campfire area, and then wandered back into the woods. I counted 3 distinct sets, all large. My gut twisted a little. I knew coyotes or even wolves might wander through, but these were big, bigger than what I'd expect from coyotes, and they were too quiet. I spent most of the day closer to the camp, reinforcing the perimeter. I built up the fire ring and gathered extra wood, enough to keep it burning bright through the night. I stayed alert, listening for anything unusual. Once, around midday, I heard a single sharp bark in the distance. Not close, not far, just one. Then silence. I didn't see anything else that day, but I barely slept that night. Came back. This time I knew there were 3. I could hear their steps. One of them pressed against the side of the tent. I could hear its breathing, feel the weight of its body against the nylon. They didn't make sounds, not snarls, not growls. Just moved around me like they were waiting. Then they left. Again. I got up before the sun and packed. I wasn't going to stay. I had 4 days left, but that didn't matter. I wasn't comfortable anymore. I took down the tent quickly and loaded everything back into my pack. I kept the knife in my hand, just in case. As I started hiking back, I noticed something I hadn't the first time. More signs of drag. A patch of dried blood, maybe a day old, soaked into leaves and dirt. Then another. Bones nearby, small, scattered. Maybe a raccoon, maybe something else, but clean, picked almost entirely bare. An hour into the hike, I noticed I was being followed. It wasn't obvious at first, but every so often I'd hear movement behind me, just out of sight. A broken twig, a sudden stop in birdsong, a shape between trees that vanished when I looked too long. I picked up my pace. At one point I turned around suddenly, and I caught one of them watching me, just standing, halfway hidden behind a trunk. It was huge, bigger than any domestic dog I'd ever seen. His fur was patchy, dark, dirty. It didn't look wild so much as wrong. Its eyes locked on mine, and it didn't flinch, just stared. Then it backed away, still watching, and disappeared. I didn't stop walking, couldn't. My legs ached. My chest burned from the effort. The forest started looking the same in every direction, and I kept checking the map to make sure I wasn't walking in circles. I kept hearing them. By late afternoon, I wasn't just hearing them, I was smelling them. Musky, wet fur, blood, something sour. They were close, too close. I didn't run, but I came as close as I could to it without actually breaking into a sprint. If I ran, I figured they'd chase. Then I saw it. A deer carcass, still fresh, but it hadn't been killed the way cats kill. No neck puncture, no quick ending. This was a mess. Its stomach was torn open, intestines half missing, ribs exposed. The legs were broken, twisted the wrong way. Whatever did this didn't kill for food, it tore apart for fun. That's when I remembered something I'd read a long time ago. Wild cats go for the neck, quick and clean. Wild dogs, though, they rip open the belly, pull out the insides, and let the prey die slow. I kept going. My legs were shaking. The sun was starting to drop. I reached my car just before full dark. I was shaking so badly I dropped my keys trying to unlock the door. I got in, slammed the lock, and sat there for a second, breathing. Then I looked up. They were there. 2 of them just standing at the tree line, watching, not chasing, not attacking, just watching. I started the engine and drove. Even now, back in my apartment with locked doors and noise and lights everywhere, I think about that trip, about how they moved, how they circled me every night but didn't attack, about how clean the bones had been, about the deer. They weren't hunting because they were hungry. They were playing. They were curious. And next time, I don't think they'll let anyone leave. It was supposed to be a quiet night. I had planned this solo camping trip for weeks, picking a remote area near a lake that was surrounded by forest on 3 sides. The weather during the day had been warm and calm, blue skies with a few fluffy clouds. It was peaceful, and I had finally felt like I could breathe after the stress of city life. I pitched my tent on a flat clearing about 20 meters from the water, staked it deep into the earth, and laid out my sleeping bag. The air smelled clean, earthy, and slightly sweet with the scent of pine needles. After dinner, I sat by the fire, just watching the flames and listening to the night come alive around me. Frogs croaking, insects buzzing, a few distant owl hoots. The wind was still. The lake was still. Everything felt safe. I didn't check the weather again. It was just past midnight when I woke up to what sounded like distant thunder. At first, I thought I had imagined it, but then another low rumble came, closer this time. I unzipped the tent and looked up. The sky had changed. I could see fast-moving clouds overhead, lit now and then by a pale flash. The wind had picked up, rustling the tops of the trees, and the temperature felt like it had dropped a few degrees. I quickly stuffed my sleeping bag back into its sack, not sure what was coming, but I felt something. It wasn't fear, not yet, just a growing pressure in my gut, a tension that wasn't there before. I threw on my rain jacket, knowing whatever was coming wasn't going to be dry. The first fat drops of rain began falling just as I finished tying everything down and getting what I could under the rain fly. Then the wind came harder, not in gusts, but a steady, rising push that made the trees sway and creak. Leaves started tearing loose, slapping into my tent. I thought about moving, maybe hiking back toward the car, but it was too late for that. The lightning started getting more intense. It wasn't a flash here and there. It was constant, overlapping, turning the night into a strobe-lit nightmare. Each bolt lit up the entire forest, and between the flashes I could see deeper and deeper into the woods around me. It was disorienting. I could barely blink before the next blinding shot of white exploded above me. The thunder was no longer rumbling. It was cracking and booming right overhead, shaking the ground. The wind screamed through the trees now, bending them in ways that looked unnatural. Some smaller limbs snapped off and flew past. The rain wasn't falling anymore. It was coming sideways, like bullets. I crouched down, hugging my pack, trying to keep my head low. My tent had started flapping violently. One of the poles cracked with a sharp snap and the corner started collapsing inward. I pulled the stakes from the ground and tried to flatten the tent, laying my weight across it so it wouldn't blow away. The roar kept growing. It sounded like an endless freight train, deep, guttural, layered with groans and howls of the wind funneling through the trees. That was the moment I knew what was happening. Somewhere nearby, a tornado was touching down. There was nowhere to go. The forest wasn't safe with trees that could snap or uproot. The open lakeside was worse, totally exposed. The only thing I could do was ride it out, stay low, and hope it passed without getting closer. I clawed my way to the base of a small embankment, laying flat on the wet ground, the earth already turning to thick mud beneath me. The noise became deafening. Trees cracked, maybe a dozen of them. I couldn't tell where exactly, but I could hear them fall, massive thuds swallowed by the storm. Then a new sound joined in, a ripping, tearing kind of sound, like the air itself was being torn apart. I didn't dare raise my head. Lightning still flashed constantly, but my eyes had adjusted. I could see the outlines of trunks, trees bending in half and whipping back. Debris flew past. Branches, leaves, something hard that hit my leg but didn't stick. I couldn't tell how close the tornado was. I never saw the funnel, but I didn't need to. I could feel it, the pressure in the air, the way my ears popped, the strange sensation in my chest like the atmosphere was squeezing me. It lasted maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10. Time didn't feel normal anymore. I lay still, every muscle tense, waiting for it to get worse. And then it stopped. Not all at once, but the roar dulled. The wind backed off to a gust. The rain turned back into a drizzle. The thunder drifted further away. I sat up, dazed, soaking wet, covered in pine needles, my pack smeared with mud. My tent was flattened, shredded in parts, but it was still there. Dawn came slowly. I didn't sleep again. Couldn't. I paced around the clearing, trying to calm down, trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. When it was finally light enough to see clearly, I did a check of the area. A few trees were down maybe 30 meters away. One had snapped in half and fallen across the trail leading back to the car. The path was covered in fresh limbs and wet leaves. I started hiking back. It took longer than usual, stepping over debris and checking for washouts. I didn't see anyone else. When I reached the small parking area, a ranger truck pulled in behind me. The ranger asked if I had made it through the night okay. That's when I found out. 2 kilometers to the east, the tornado had touched down, cutting a jagged path right through another part of the woods. One campsite over there had been completely leveled. The people had left just the day before. I drove home in silence. My hands were still trembling, not from cold, but from everything I'd just seen and felt. I knew I had been lucky. Not smart, not brave, just lucky. If that tornado had shifted just a little more in my direction, I wouldn't be here writing this. There was no drama to it, no mystical escape. Just timing. Pure, dumb timing. I still camp. I still love the woods. But I check the weather now. Every time. And I don't ignore that feeling in my gut when the air changes. Nature doesn't care if you're ready. It comes how it wants, and you don't get to negotiate. You just hold on. Flatten yourself to the mud, and pray you're not in the direct path. That storm changed something in me. It peeled back a layer of illusion I didn't know I had, that somehow I was safe, in control, just because I had gear and experience. That night reminded me that survival isn't always about doing the right thing. Sometimes it's just being in the less unlucky spot. I'll never forget that sound, the tearing roar of air being pulled apart overhead. I'll never forget how the lightning never seemed to stop. And I'll never forget how close I came to being one more name in the news. I packed up what I could save from that trip, threw away the torn tent and the broken pole, replaced the rain jacket that got ripped, but I kept the pack. It still smells faintly of smoke and mud. It reminds me that nature doesn't need a reason, and sometimes survival is just about lying still and waiting for it to pass. It was late summer when my siblings and I decided to go on one last camping trip before we all had to head back to work and school. There were 4 of us, me, my older brother, and our 2 younger sisters. We'd picked a well-known campground near a lake that we'd gone to as kids. It had enough trees for shade, but also a wide clearing right by the water where we could pitch our tents and have a campfire. The forecast looked clear when we packed up and left, just the usual end of August humidity hanging in the air. We arrived late in the afternoon. It was calm, hot, and still. The air had that heavy, sticky feeling to it, like the heat was pressing down on everything. The sky had that pale blue cast that made shadows soft. We set up 2 tents, one for the girls and one for me and my brother. We unpacked chairs, got the fire pit going, and started cooking dinner over the flames. Everything about it felt like the kind of summer night we always remembered having as kids. After we ate, we watched the sun go down over the lake. It was beautiful. The surface of the water caught the colors like a mirror, turning gold and pink and then finally blue as dusk crept in. We didn't think much about the sky beyond the usual pretty sunset talk. The bugs were out in full force, so we used bug spray and kept close to the fire. Later, around 10 or so, we climbed into the tents. I fell asleep listening to the sound of frogs and the occasional splash from fish jumping. But sometime after midnight, I woke up sweating. The air inside the tent felt thick and unmoving. I sat up, unzipped the flap a little to get air, and noticed the sky had changed. It was dark, not just nighttime dark, but pitch black and low. There wasn't a single star visible. The clouds had taken everything. The first flash of lightning lit up the entire tent like someone flicked on a massive overhead light. Not a second later, a sharp crack of thunder followed. It was so close and so loud that I actually ducked instinctively. My brother was awake now too, sitting up, looking around like he'd just come out of a deep sleep. More flashes, then more. The sky was strobing. There was barely even time for darkness between the bursts. The thunder didn't even crack anymore. It just rolled, deep and constant like the rumble of a freight train passing right behind your head. The air pressure felt like it was dropping hard and fast. Then came the wind. It started small, little gusts shaking the leaves, but it picked up fast. Within a few minutes, it sounded like a hurricane ripping through the trees. I could hear the branches creaking and snapping. The tent started shaking. Not a little rustle, not the kind of wind you brace for and it passes. No, this was real movement, the kind that had the poles bending and the fabric lifting off the ground like it wanted to fly. I heard the girls yelling from the other tent, and I scrambled to throw on a hoodie and open the zipper. Outside, the world looked like a horror movie. The wind bent trees sideways. The fire pit had blown apart, and embers were scattered across the damp ground, snuffed out by the rain that had started to fall. Only it wasn't just rain, it was horizontal, coming in sheets. We grabbed our shoes and sprinted through the sideways rain to the car, which was parked on a little dirt path just up the hill. The gravel was slick, and my feet kept slipping. Lightning was hitting the lake over and over, lighting up the trees and casting giant shadows. Every bolt seemed to land with a sharp, blinding flash, followed by a sound so loud I couldn't hear myself breathing. We got into the car and slammed the doors shut, all of us soaking wet, panting and looking out the foggy windows. The tent flapped violently for a few minutes more, then one corner finally gave out. We watched it crumple, get lifted off the ground, and then tumble like a giant parachute before getting snagged in a tree. The car itself didn't feel safe. It was rocking not from us shifting weight but from the wind. It actually bounced on its shocks. I started to wonder if a tree was going to come down on us or if we'd get lifted like in those terrifying videos you see of tornadoes spinning cars into the air. We sat there for what felt like forever. The storm didn't ease up. If anything, it got worse. The lightning wasn't even flashing anymore, it was just there, almost constant. The clouds above us lit up like a flickering bulb, and that low roar never let up. It wasn't thunder anymore. It was something else, something deeper. A kind of vibration that you felt in your chest. That was when we decided to leave. No one even said anything. We just knew. My brother started the engine and eased the car down the muddy road. Branches and leaves smacked the windshield. We couldn't go fast, visibility was awful, and the trees were leaning, some broken, some half across the road. It took us nearly half an hour to go what normally would have taken maybe 10 minutes. But we made it to the main road, and from there we just kept going. The storm chased us the whole time. Even 20 minutes later, pulling into my grandpa's gravel driveway, the wind still screamed, and the thunder still rolled. We went inside, dripping, heart rate still high, soaked clothes clinging to our skin. My grandpa was asleep, of course. It was around 2:30 in the morning by then. We didn't bother waking him. We just crashed on couches and the living room floor. The next morning, the sun was out. Clear blue skies. It was like nothing had ever happened. Except we knew what had happened. We drove back to the campground mid-morning to see what was left. The entrance road was blocked in one spot by a downed tree. Park workers were already there, chainsaws going, moving debris. One of them told us the campground was closed off in parts. A tornado had touched down, they said. Small one, F1 probably, but enough to rip through a line of trees and scatter everything in its path. When we got back to our site, the damage was clear. Our tent was still tangled in that tree. Poles were snapped. One of our chairs was crumpled under a fallen limb. The fire pit had been reduced to a circle of scattered rocks. My sleeping bag was gone entirely. We searched all around the site, even down toward the lake, but it was just gone. Like the wind had taken it up and never let go. We gathered what we could salvage, tied the tent pieces together, and packed up in silence. I don't remember talking much that day. We were all just quiet, taking it in. That storm was the most intense thing I'd ever been through outdoors. I've camped through heavy rain, even a blizzard once. But this was different. The noise, the wind, the way the lightning seemed to crack the sky open. Nothing had ever come close. We weren't just caught in bad weather. We were inches away from something that could have seriously hurt us or worse. I still think about it now and then, especially when I hear thunder rolling in the distance. The memory comes back sharp and clear. Not just the sound, but the feeling of pressure in the air, the blinding flashes, the way we all looked at each other without saying anything, knowing we had to run. That deep instinct that said, "Get out now." I haven't gone back to that campground since. Not because I'm scared of storms or of camping. I still love being out in the woods, sitting by a fire, falling asleep under the stars. But that one night reminded me that nature doesn't care where you pitched your tent or how careful you were. When it decides to come through, you're just in the way. That storm took a lot of small things, our tent, my sleeping bag, a few chairs, but it gave me something much bigger, a permanent respect for the power of weather. A reminder that when it's roaring overhead and the trees start to bend, no fabric wall is going to keep you safe. You run, you get to shelter, you listen to your gut. And when the next storm comes, you'll remember exactly what it felt like to ride one out with nothing but nylon between you and the sky. The trip started out like any other. My cousin Tiff and I had been planning this backpacking trip in the mountains of Virginia for weeks. We'd gone on a few shorter trips before, but this one was going to be different. We wanted something remote, something that would give us the kind of peace that only the mountains could provide. A place where we could hike, camp, and enjoy the solitude without being bothered by anyone. The mountains in Virginia seemed like the perfect choice. It was a long drive to get there, longer than we had anticipated. The road to the trailhead was in terrible shape, more potholes than actual road. Each bump felt like it was going to knock something loose on the car. We were both laughing about it, trying to keep the mood light. The road narrowed, twisting through thick trees. The closer we got to the trailhead, the more isolated everything felt. No other cars in sight, no signs of life. It was just the two of us, our gear packed into the back, and the excitement of the hike ahead of us. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, we reached the only parking lot that gave access to the trailhead. The lot was small, barely enough space for a handful of cars. As we pulled in, there was only one other car there, an old Jeep parked off to the side. We didn't think much of it at first. After all, it was a popular trail, or so we had heard. We parked next to the Jeep, loaded our packs, and began our hike. The trail itself wasn't too bad, though it was challenging in spots. We crossed small streams, climbed over rocks, and hiked up steep ridges. The air was crisp, the smell of pine and earth fresh in our lungs. We were both in good shape, and the hike gave us the chance to enjoy the beauty of the mountains. The sounds of the forest surrounded us, the distant calls of birds, the rustle of leaves in the wind. It was peaceful, the kind of peace you can only get when you're deep in the woods, far from the noise of the world. About halfway up the trail, We passed a couple of backpackers who were heading back toward the trailhead. They didn't seem too chatty, but they looked like they'd been out for a while. We exchanged a quick nod before they disappeared into the trees. That was when we realized that as long as nobody else came after us, we'd be alone on this side of the mountain. The other car in the parking lot was long gone, and the trail was quiet. We were alone, just the two of us and our packs, with no one else for miles. It wasn't until we got to our campsite that things started to get interesting. We found a good spot near a creek, just off the main trail. It was quiet, isolated, and exactly what we were looking for. The ground was level, and there were plenty of trees around to hang our food and set up a fire. We made sure to hang the food far from our tent, knowing how important it was to keep it out of reach of any curious wildlife. We gathered firewood, set up our camp, and began settling in. As the evening set in, we sat around the fire, chatting, cooking our meals, and taking in the natural beauty of the place. The sky above us was a deep, clear blue, and the stars began to emerge as the last bit of sunlight faded. The air was cold, but we were prepared with sub-zero sleeping bags and layers to keep warm. We both felt secure, relaxed, like we had the whole mountain to ourselves. Later, after a long day of hiking and exploring, I crawled into my sleeping bag, exhausted. The fire had burned down to embers, and the night felt still. I closed my eyes and drifted off to sleep, the sound of the creek running in the background and the occasional rustle of the wind in the trees. But then, something woke me up. I felt the jabs to my ribs before I even heard my cousin's whisper. I opened my eyes groggily, adjusting to the dim light of the tent. Tiff was sitting up, her face a mix of concern and curiosity. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "No, Tiff, I was sleeping." "What did you hear?" I mumbled, still half asleep. I didn't want to deal with whatever was out there. It was probably just a raccoon or an opossum, I thought. We were deep in the woods, after all. Animals were bound to wander through. She shushed me, her eyes wide in the dark. She wasn't playing around. "There's something outside," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. At this point, I wasn't too concerned. It was 2 a.m. We'd been in the woods before. Nothing ever happened in the dead of night. I was exhausted, and honestly, the last thing I wanted to do was sit up and worry about whatever animal was outside the tent. If it was a bear, we'd know it. If it was a coyote or something smaller, it wasn't worth losing sleep over. I started to roll over, reaching for my earplugs. I was about to stick them in my ears when the sound came. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. At first, I couldn't make out what it was. It sounded almost unnatural, like something was trying to communicate but couldn't get it right. It was loud, piercing, and it echoed through the trees. My heart skipped a beat. The sound was high-pitched, but it had a strange rhythm to it. It almost sounded like a turkey's gobble, but at the same time, it had this warning tone to it, almost like a big cat screech, but it wasn't quite that either. It was like a mix of several sounds, but nothing I could place. I froze, my mind racing. I had spent so many nights in the deep woods, camping and hiking across the country, and I had never heard anything like this. It wasn't a bird, it wasn't a deer, it wasn't anything I could identify. It was unsettling, and it made the hair on my arms stand up. I was still trying to process what I had just heard when Tiff whispered again. "Do you think it's a mountain lion?" I didn't know. I had heard mountain lions make noises, but this didn't sound like anything I had ever come across in all my years in the wilderness. It was worse than anything I could have imagined. It felt like we were being watched, like something large and powerful was nearby, just out of sight. I put my earplugs back in, deciding that it was probably best to ignore it. There was nothing we could do. We were in the middle of the woods, and at this hour, whatever it was, we were likely just an inconvenience. The sound didn't come again that night, at least not that I heard. We lay there in silence, the occasional rustling of the trees our only company. I kept my eyes open, but the night was still, and the strange noise never repeated. Eventually, exhaustion took over again, and I drifted back to sleep. The next morning, the campsite was peaceful. The sun had risen, and the air was warm, though still crisp. We packed up slowly, taking in the quiet of the morning. As we made our way back down the mountain, I couldn't shake the strange sound we had heard. It stuck with me, gnawing at the back of my mind. What could it have been? When we reached the little town at the bottom of the mountain, we stopped at the market to grab some snacks before heading home. I couldn't resist asking the locals about the sound. I even tried to mimic it, though I felt ridiculous doing so. At first, nobody seemed to know what I was talking about. I got a few puzzled looks, but no real answers. Then, an old couple overheard us and came over. They were farmers, old-timers who had lived in the area for years. When I told them about the sound, they looked at each other with wide eyes. "You heard that, huh?" one of them said, his voice low and gravelly. "Not many do. You're lucky." Lucky? Lucky to hear something that terrifying? I didn't understand. The other farmer nodded. "That sound is something you don't forget. It's a rare thing, a real treat if you're into wildlife. But nobody knows exactly what makes it. Some think it's a mountain lion, others say it's something else. It's hard to say for sure. The more they talked, the less I understood. I wanted answers, something definitive, but all I got were more questions. They didn't seem worried about the sound, though. They treated it like something normal, something that happened from time to time. We left the market, still with no idea what had made that noise. The drive back home was quiet. We both kept to ourselves, each lost in our thoughts. That sound was still ringing in my ears, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we had just scratched the surface of something much bigger. At home, we spent hours online searching for a similar sound, but nothing came close. I listened to hundreds of wildlife calls, but none matched. It was frustrating, maddening even. I still think about that night sometimes. What was that sound? What was out there in the woods with us? I may never know, but I know one thing for sure. I'll never forget it.